Hey everyone, this is the Halifax Real Estate Podcast. My name is Jason Paul and I'm a licensed realtor at Keller Williams Select Realty in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm here to help you gain a better understanding of real estate in Halifax and introduce you to a wide variety of people that work in or with our industry as well. Cory MacNutt is the founder and owner of Atmosphere Comfort, a business that specializes in residential and commercial heating, air conditioning, sales, and services. Please welcome Cory MacNutt. Hey, Cory, how are you?
Good. How you doing today?
I'm good, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate you having me.
You're the kind of like when you did your seminar at Keller Williams, and I got a clip of it. I wasn't there for the live. I listened to the recording on YouTube, and I thought it's what I need. Personally, because I'm still like 4 years old as a realtor, and like when it comes to heating your home, there are so many different methods, whether it's forced air, electronic, baseboard, oil, natural gas, propane, and to have an expert on share that wisdom and knowledge, I thought perfect. So I called you.
No, I appreciate it.
So I guess my first question would be, how did you get into heating homes?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I actually, my family was into doing ductwork and sheet metal work and things like that.
Okay.
When I was younger. So yeah, I got into ductwork, sheet metal, and ventilation, things like that when I was probably 18.
Okay.
I did that for 3 or 4 years. I kept getting laid off. So I'd work in a high-rise building and kind of, do all the ventilation, the ductwork and things like that in the building. And then I kept getting laid off at the end of the job, and then I'd be off for 3 or 4 months or whatever and go from one job to another job. And so it wasn't very stable for me back then. And, we're talking like 20 years ago.
Okay.
So eventually I ended up going back to trade school.
Okay.
And somebody mentioned that maybe it might be worthwhile to do like the air conditioning trade or something along that line. So I went back to trade school, did that for 2 years, became an apprentice, went through the apprenticeship program, worked for a few other companies, and then kind of hit it off from there.
Nice.
So yeah, I think it was 3 or 4 years. I think it was 24. And then I decided it was time to kind of spread out and do my own thing.
Yeah.
So I've been doing it ever since.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
What made you start your own business?
Well, one of the things is that I always seemed to work my way up into a leadership position. So even at a young age, at 21 years old, I was the job foreman for a lot of those sheet metal jobs that I was doing.
Nice.
And then when I went to work for other companies, doing more air conditioning and heating work, it was kind of the same thing. I just kind of had a niche for really wanting to take the spotlight and take that leadership role.
Yep.
And then I kind of realized that once you get to that position and you have a little bit more experience and more seniority, you probably want to get to the point where you do things more so for yourself than making other people rich, I guess you could say. So
understandable.
Yeah. So yeah, and I just decided one day to do it. It was a random one-off. I was working for a big company in Dartmouth. And they lost the school board contract to another company.
Okay.
And so, they came to me and said, we're probably going to have to lay you off for a little while until things peter down. I actually got a contact from the other company to go work with them and carry on the same kind of position. I was kind of running the school board contract, but I declined it. And I said, you know what, I've really been thinking about kind of spreading out and doing my own thing. That was probably, well, like I said, that was 15 years ago.
Okay.
And that was right when everyone was really getting antsy about the price of oil.
Yeah.
Because that was when we were really first starting to see the price of oil, start going over $1. And then, gas was up to $1.50 a liter. Heat pumps were really starting to take off at that point, but weren't overly popular yet. People were still hesitant to buy. We were still in that education phase. A lot of guinea pigs, or people were thinking they were guinea pigs getting into it.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing that I get into when we first started was geothermal heating. Because of the price of oil, people were really afraid of, having these high heating costs and really wanting to do something to go the polar opposite of doing that.
Yep.
So I'll never forget it. It was just myself when I first started. I didn't come from a situation where I had a lot of money to back me up or a partner or anything like that. It was all on my shoulders. So I decided to get a booth at the home show. And I remember having a 10 by 10 booth at the home show, and that weekend there was such a lineup to speak to me about geothermal heating and heat pumps in general, because I was only one of probably 3 other contractors at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. And they had to come, the staff for the home show had to come and lay pylons down to separate the people in the aisle so that they would have a laneway to walk past. So I'll never forget that. That was quite the experience.
Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine you just opened up a booth off a whim, and then there is this cascade of an army of people just trying to.
Yeah, it was rather flattering, and it was kind of nerve-wracking too, right? Because I mean, I had experience leading up to that, with customer service and working with people, but I've never been in that spotlight where, like what I say is kind of being taken as gospel, and so it was a huge learning experience for me at the time, but
also confidence boost that you picked the right industry.
100% for sure.
When you realize demand is there, you're like, oh, okay, I
made the right choice. Yeah, for sure.
Now you brought up geothermal heating. What is geothermal heating?
So geothermal, basically what it is we take heat and extract it from the ground.
Okay.
And then what we do is we transfer that into a home or into a commercial space.
Yeah.
In Halifax, because of the fact that we're basically living on solid bedrock and granite, normally you can't run lines in the ground horizontally because you can't get down far enough in the ground. There's not enough overburden, is what they would call it, like topsoil or dirt.
Yep.
So normally what we do is we would look to like a well drilling company or something like that to drill holes vertically into the ground. The depth of the hole is based on the size of the heating system that you're installing.
Okay.
And what you do is you run piping in the ground.
Interesting.
The ground temperature, no matter where you are in the world, maintains the same temperature after you go below generally about 8 feet. So when you go below that marker in the ground temperature, no matter what the surface temperature is, today, this morning was -12.
Yeah.
The ground temperature is still, relatively quite a bit above zero.
Okay.
And so it's a huge opportunity to draw heat from the earth in order to then transfer that. So normally what happens with geothermal is you would have a heat pump is the normal process. Basically what happens is the heat pump cools down a fluid like an antifreeze solution.
Okay.
That runs into the ground and it absorbs heat from the ground, and then that will then get transferred back to the heat pump, and then the heat pump will then transfer that heat to this space.
Yeah.
And you can do that either with in-floor heating, like it piping in the ground or in the floor.
In the floors.
Or you can do it from like forced air where you've got ducting in the home, and then you can, blow heat or cooling with that particular system.
Okay. So that is really cool because my fiance is from Ontario, and she always brings up, why don't you guys have geothermal? Because Ontario is very big on geothermal. If someone's going to pursue geothermal as a way to heat their house, and you say you have to bring in well drill or residual deep down in the soil, how far do they have to drill typically? Is it just the 8-foot mark and then they're good, or is it like the 10 foot, 15 feet?
No, so the way it works is that heat pumps are based, it's a thing called tons. So in our industry, what we call it's a ton, and that's a lingo that we would use. So when you go look at a new home, in Halifax or in Nova Scotia for general, heat pumps are probably the most popular heating product you can purchase right now.
Yeah.
I think the primary reason for that is because we live in a heating predominant climate, but we have a mild climate for the most part. But we also have the need for air conditioning.
Yes.
So a heat pump will do both.
Yep.
Right. So what we do is we have to then look at the home, figure out the square footage of the home. If it's an older home, we have to take things into consideration like wall thickness, insulation values. Every home is different.
Yep.
So we would do what's called a heat load calculation. Basically what that does is it tells us what size heat pump the home needs in order to heat or cool it. Once we determine that, normally the drilling in the ground is actually 150 feet per ton of heat pump. So let's say, for instance, an average size home is 2,500 to 3,000 square feet. That would probably have like a 3-ton heat pump.
Okay.
So you would be drilling a hole in the ground 450 feet deep.
Nice.
Yeah.
Efficient.
Yeah.
Also, average home sizes are not 2,500. What average home? What market are you in, my friend? I like it though, luxury. So 450. You need to drill down 450 square feet. Or I'm sorry. Yeah, right.
450 feet.
That's what I'm saying, not square feet.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's usually 150 feet per ton.
Yeah.
And so when we look at a heat pump, a ton of heating or cooling is 12,000 BTUs an hour.
Okay.
Okay. So a general, a typical home is usually a 3-ton heat pump. That's the most common size that you would normally see.
Yes.
So for something of that size, you would drill down in the ground 450 feet.
Okay. You bring up the bedrock in Halifax, which is not commonly known. It is why we don't drill down in buildings on the peninsula. When everyone says, why don't they have a subway? Why don't they drill down and create storage or parking below ground? It's because we are on a sheeted bedrock. And a builder told me that a space costs $75,000 to put in because of all the drilling that has to go into the bedrock.
Wow.
So like when you think of underground parking, if that quote is an actual reflection, don't take me for that. That's just what I was quoted by some man. It's a lot of money to get those underground parking spaces. So if I'm on the Halifax Peninsula and I want geothermal, can we get geothermal, or are there only certain locations that we can drill down to get that geothermal tongue in the ground?
You can. You can pretty much do it anywhere.
Okay.
The biggest thing with the peninsula is that you have got to have at least enough square footage around the property in order for the well drilling equipment to be able to be on the property.
Okay.
You've got local codes and rules and regulations where, the drilling has to be so far off the property line, no different than your driveway or your shed or garage you want to build or anything like that. So you've got to be far enough away from all of the, the property lines. But other than that, we've done projects in downtown Halifax.
Okay.
We've done projects in the Valley. We've done projects in Truro. But generally, you're normally looking at a vertical drill, because the other way, like when people think about geothermal, a lot of times what they think about is, that's, all the piping in the ground.
Yes.
Well, the most common way to do it is you dig a trench, and the trench has to be about 6 feet deep and 4 feet wide, and you put a massive amount of piping in the ground. It's just, they're called slinkies.
Yep.
And it's literally just coils and coils and coils of pipe, like hundreds and hundreds of feet of pipe. And then what you do is you backfill that, and you fill that all in with dirt and sand and everything else, and you bury it. The problem with it is that to do, again, like a 2,500 to 3,000 square foot home, you would probably need 3 trenches that were 100 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 6 feet deep.
Yeah.
Right? And then they'd have to be spaced farther apart. So you can imagine that maybe in certain areas of the property, you might get down 6 feet. But in a lot of areas, especially in Halifax, you're not going to get farther than 2 or 3 feet, and you're hitting solid rock.
Solid rock.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can. So it is possible just to drill down and get that footage you need. How much does it typically cost to put in geothermal?
If you were to take a brand new home, by the time you installed the equipment and let's say we did a ducted system.
Yep.
So if you did duct work and you put in all the equipment, and then you took into consideration the cost of the drilling and everything, you're probably looking at the better part of $40,000.
Woo!
Yeah. And so that's why where we are in our market, it's not a highly popular option for people.
Yeah.
As you mentioned earlier, with the average size of a home, they're not 2,500 to 3,000 square feet. So normally what we run into now, years ago when I first started getting going on my own, I was selling a lot more geothermal. But since that time, with development, manufacturing, typical heat pumps that you see, basically everywhere now, you get your unit outside, those products have come, leaps and bounds in efficiency. So, in a climate like Nova Scotia, where we do have generally mild winters, I know today is not the norm.
It's February. It's always cold in February.
Right. So, we've got a good, 2 or 3 weeks of the winter where it's, relatively
freezing.
cold.
Yeah.
And the rest of the time, we look at January this year, it was beautiful, right? So, with products like that, they can pretty much take on most of the heating demand. And give you a huge return on investment. So normally when we look at pitching or even considering doing geothermal for customers, what we look at is your building footprint.
Yeah.
If you've got a 5,000 square foot home plus, that's when you would look at doing a geothermal system, because we have customers. I think we did a project 2 years ago, and the home was 13,000 square feet.
Oh,
it was a large home. And the customer came to us and said, we have this large home. We're spending, I think it was like $9,000 a year for oil to heat the home.
that seems cheap for 13,000 square feet. In my head.
It was a newer home.
Yeah.
But they were still spending a significant amount of money. It was in-floor heating, and originally when it was installed, the price of oil was a lot better than it, as time has gone on, it's gone up and it's kind of been volatile. So they came to us and they said, we'd really like to entertain doing geothermal. Is it worth it for us? How much is it going to cost us? The price tag for the project was well over $60,000-$70,000 to do it.
Yep.
But it dropped their heating costs from $9,000-$10,000 a year down below $3,000.
Wow.
So they were saving, $6,000 a year.
In 5, 7, 10 years, you're going to make all that back.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the geothermal system, the glory of the geothermal system is it doesn't just provide space heating or cooling. What it also does is if you develop it properly and you design it properly, you can get a huge benefit in your domestic hot water. Because when you run your air conditioning in the summertime with a typical air conditioning product, what you're doing is you're taking heat from the home and you're rejecting it outside. The box that's outside, it's called a condenser for all intent and purpose. What we do is it takes the heat from the house and it rejects it outside.
Okay.
So instead of doing that with geothermal, what it does is it takes the heat from the home and it rejects it into your domestic hot water. So then during your cooling season, it's more advantageous, if you can believe this, it's more advantageous for you to actually operate your heat pump and run your cooling on a more regular basis than it is to not run it and heat your domestic hot water with, say, electric heat.
Huh. Interesting.
And in the wintertime, it would work similar with what happens is the heat pump will operate, it will heat up the space.
Yep.
And any residual heat that's left over, again, will then be pushed into your domestic hot water. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the savings, the significant savings on that just sounds alone incredible.
Right.
Now, with geothermal, I'm not done with this topic yet because I actually don't know that much about geothermal. When you have those pipes and the tongs we're talking about, they're 450 feet deep in the soil. And these are pipes we're talking about, right? The tongs are piping just to transfer that heat from the soil to the home, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So when you get to that 8-foot threshold we talked about, that's where we see the ground freezing, could your pipes potentially freeze?
No, because the fluid that we put through the piping,
yes, antifreeze.
It has antifreeze.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I got that whole thing.
Yeah.
What kind of savings do you typically see with an average geothermal home after they've installed it? We understand the heavy upfront cost, but what are the typical savings after the fact?
It depends on the existing heating system that's there.
Yeah.
But generally, it's about 75%.
Oh, so $100 bill down to $25, just like roughly in typically in that ballpark. Yeah. That's an incredible savings.
Yeah. But again, like I said, we have a lot of customers that know about geothermal.
Yeah.
And they'll call us and, they'll say, we have, a 2,500 square foot bungalow. We have an oil furnace and we're spending, $2,800 a year on oil.
Yes.
And, we'd really like to get off oil. And so we thought maybe we'd look at doing geothermal. Well, the issue with it is that even in a project for a home that size, you're looking at, $30,000+ to install a system. Even if they get, if they reduce their heating costs from $2,800 down to $1,000 a year, it's $1,800 a year is what they're saving. So it's a significant savings.
Yeah.
The problem with it is
that upfront capital.
Yeah, it takes forever.
Yeah.
And so the issue with it is for a client like that is, is this worth the investment?
Yeah.
Where by the time you get it paid for, even if you get it paid for, you're getting into that time frame of, well, now the equipment has to be replaced.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So normally what we do with customers that have, a lower heating costs than say, like I said, with this larger home, we would look at doing like a better, higher efficiency, regular standard, like air source heat pump is what it's called. Right.
Okay. Yeah. So the equipment for geothermal has a lifespan.
Yes.
What's the typical lifespan?
Well, the nice thing about geothermal, unlike a typical heat pump, is there's nothing outside. So the piping that's in the ground, generally it's made out of a high density polyethylene plastic is essentially what it is.
Yeah.
So it's a really, really strong plastic. I believe, I can't remember if this is correct or not, but I do believe that the plastic that is used for geothermal is actually heavier and stronger than what they use for natural gas lines.
Okay.
So once it's in the ground, from what we've been told from a lot of the companies that we've dealt with that do the drilling and put the pipes in the ground, that pipe will last like 100 years.
Okay.
In the ground. So other than that, all your equipment's inside, which is nice about it. So the typical lifespan for a geothermal system is upwards of 25 years.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay. One last question, then we'll move on to the next topic. So we talked about the bedrock in Halifax, and you said you've done this work in Truro and Kentville. Is that bedrock all across the province, or are there some areas where that it's a much more easier cost?
There are some areas that it's easier. I know within, once you probably come in towards the city, or like you said, along the coast really, is where it's solid bedrock, whether that's in Halifax, down through Bridgewater to Yarmouth.
Okay.
But there are certain areas, the valley is one of them.
Okay.
So once you get down around, Wolfville, Digby area, you can run into situations where there is a lot more to work with.
Yeah.
And we have done horizontal lines. Yeah. So it's not everywhere.
No.
But for all intent and purpose, generally speaking, for anyone within the HRM kind of area or the South Shore or along the shoreline, really, it's mostly
bedrock.
Bedrock.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in your experience, what is the most common? I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but what is the most common way we use in Nova Scotia and Halifax to heat a home?
The most common way? Well, it depends on the era the house was built. If you look at a new home as built today, it's a heat pump.
Okay.
So most homes nowadays that are being built within Nova Scotia, you're either looking at a home that has some form of a baseboard heating. So that could be an electric baseboard heating, but they're always supplemented with a heat pump.
Yeah.
So if you've got baseboard heating, whether that be hot water baseboard or in-floor heating, if that, that could be in-floor heating, or electric, they're normally putting in one or a few ductless heat pumps, which are those things that you see on the wall, right? That's probably the most common way. And then the second most common way, what we find is when the homes are getting up and, above the $400,000 marker as far as a new construction goes, most of those homes have centrally ducted heating systems. So those are ducted heat pumps where there's, the ductwork throughout the home, and then you've got the furnace and the unit. So those are the most common ways for new construction home that are being done. If you go back the last 30 or 40 years, if you look through the 80s, there was a lot of homes that were built in the 80s that had forced air oil furnaces.
Yes.
So, we can convert those over to a ducted heat pump. Then you've got a lot of homes through the 90s. It kind of went through a stage where it was a lot of electric heat and a lot of hot water baseboard that was powered by oil.
Yes.
Right. So, a lot of those homes, when we go to look at those homes for, looking at doing a heat pump, you can't get rid of the existing heating system in that home completely, but you can augment it with some of those ductless heat pump systems, right?
Yeah. So let's say we have a ductless heat pump system, right? Would it be more efficient for a typical homeowner to add the ductwork for that forced air to push through?
No, because the cost, like when you look at doing a renovation or a heating upgrade like that, the problem with it is that most homes are completely finished and drywalled. So it's a huge cost undertaking in order to convert an existing home from a baseboard style heating to a forced air style heating, because you've got to try and get the duct distribution system from your basement and your utility room throughout the entire home. Yeah. Which is there's a lot more to it than just doing the ducting. You've got to take down a lot of drywall, put all the ducting through it, all the interior walls and everything else, and then drywall it all back and then paint everything together. So, if you're looking at doing something like that, again, we're getting back into that. Is it worth it while to do geothermal versus something else? Because the cost of doing that, well, the upfront cost for the heating system is one component. And then you've got, Then you've got all of your renovation repairs, paintwork, patchwork, and everything else to contend with once it's all dealt with. Right?
Yeah. Okay. So if someone's running on electric baseboard oil, what are ways that they can make their home more energy efficient to save costs on that expense? Because as we said, oil's only been going up. It's volatile. And we throw that with your Nova Scotia power bill. It's usually a heavy expense to heat the home. So how can like the average homeowner make their home run better so that they can kind of keep that bill a little lower?
Well, a couple of things they can do. One, if they've got baseboard heating, then they would have several different zones throughout the home.
Okay.
So one thing they can do is they can put in programmable thermostats or smart thermostats, which a lot of people are using nowadays. And what that'll do is it'll monitor and try to control the heating system to the best of its ability, whereas a typical thermostat is basically just on and off.
Yeah.
So one thing you can do is you can lower your heating costs by putting in programmable thermostats, which I know Efficiency Nova Scotia and Nova Scotia Power have promoted that in the past, and that's something that they continue to promote.
Yeah.
Obviously, the other thing you can do, which is the biggest thing that we get calls on, is supplementing those heating systems with ductless heat pumps.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if you have, a 2-level split entry home, you can go in and you can put a heat pump on the main floor in the common area, and then you can put another one in your basement. And those will become more the primary heating and driving force for your heat. Most people that when they do that, they'll see, somewhere between a 35 and 50% cost reduction in their heating costs, whether they're heating with electric baseboard or oil, hot water.
Okay. Yeah. How much does it cost to bring you guys in to install the heat pump?
It depends on the size of the heat pump and how many a customer wants, but on average, the average cost for like 2 or 3 heat pumps to put in someone's home, that's the typical that most people will do. It usually runs between $6,000 and $10,000.
Okay, and I know Efficiency Nova Scotia offers rebates, right?
They do. There's some small rebates there, so it's again that the rebate program works based on how many systems you put in, and the size of the equipment. So again, when we talk about tons, as we did earlier with geothermal, all heat pumps are based on that criteria. We call it tons in the industry. So for instance, for every 12,000 BTUs of heat pump that you install, I think Efficiency Nova Scotia will do $200 to $300 per 12,000 BTUs of heat pump install. Yeah.
Now, when we talk about those numbers, $200 to $300 for 12,000 tons, what's the typical tons per home?
For a multi-zone system, if you were to take again, like say for an average like split entry home, if we put a system in where you've got, a system upstairs and one downstairs, you're probably going to get 24,000 BTUs, which would be 2 tons.
Okay.
Yeah. So the rebate amount for that from Efficiency Nova Scotia would be somewhere between $400 and $600.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to make sure for math for people at home. Yeah. Because someone's thinking about that right now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
When we're talking about now, one of the biggest most common questions I get as a realtor is how can because most people want to get off oil. It's just the way it is. They're on an oil tank system and they're thinking of changing to a propane fuel efficiency or a natural gas efficiency. What makes propane or natural gas more efficient than oil, other than the cost per,
Well, you've got equipment now where oil boilers, you can get oil boilers now that I'm pretty sure will give you like a 95, 96% efficiency.
Okay.
Essentially what that means is that for every $1 worth of gas or oil or whatever you're using, you put into that system, you're getting 96% out of that. Or
nice.
96 cents on the dollar.
Okay.
There's always this argument about efficiency versus cost.
Yeah.
So if you look at a natural gas, for instance, a lot of people get it in their mind that, natural gas is so much more efficient. No, it's not so much more efficient at all. You can get a natural gas furnace that is, 96% efficient. The reason why natural gas is so advantageous, or at least for the time being, is because natural gas is a cheap product. Right, exactly.
Okay.
If you compare natural gas to oil, if you were to take a natural gas furnace and an oil furnace, and they both offered the same fuel utilization efficiency, exactly, the natural gas would win, not because it's more efficient, just because the price of the fossil fuel is cheaper than the oil.
Okay.
There's no difference between the efficiency of the two products other than
price point
of the product that you're using to
That's interesting to hear.
Yeah.
When because one thing with natural gas right now is Heritage Gas obviously does the lining for the city, but it only goes out so far. They've only installed that line, so like that conversion you can do at home is typically much harder because when you think about someone out in Porter's Lake or Brookside, and they're like, I want to put on natural gas, well, there are no lines, so that's a problem. But going back to the furnace system, okay, so this is intriguing to me. Is that say someone buys a single family home and they want to learn how efficient their furnace system actually is. Is there a way to test for that? Is there a way for them to be educated on how that system is actually operating?
Yes. So a gas technician could come into the home,
Okay.
and he could do a full assessment on the system, and he would be able to tell you what the actual output efficiency of your gas furnace is.
Interesting.
And then you would be able to know, right? You can do this with oil as well.
Yeah.
Right. So because with electric, the standard is electric is 1-to-1. So electric, whether it's electric baseboard or whatever it is, it's always basically 100% efficient. It's not going to be any less. It's not going to be any more. It's just 100% efficient. The reason why is because you don't have transfer from burning natural gas or burning oil. You don't have that loss of energy in the burning of the fossil fuel.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but yes, you can essentially have a test done in order to determine how efficient the natural gas furnace or oil furnace is.
Okay. Do you guys conduct those tests?
We don't.
Okay.
But there are several other companies within HRM that do.
Yeah. I was just curious because my next question was going to be, well, how inefficient do you see these boilers or these systems? But
the worst, usually if you look at like an older oil furnace, most oil furnaces that are, 20 plus years old, they're usually coming in around 81 to 86% efficient.
okay.
Like the standard, 15 to 20 year old kind of home.
Yeah.
With an oil furnace is usually coming in at about 81 to 86% efficient. Natural gas furnaces have been and currently are usually more efficient.
Okay.
But I do know that there are a lot of higher end gas and oil furnaces you can get you can get up into this 97, 98%
Nice.
efficiency. Yeah.
Okay. Now touching on electric baseboard, because you mentioned something that was really interesting. 1-to-1.
Mm-hmm.
So typically with electric baseboard, you get what you put into it.
Yes.
Okay. So by electric baseboard, we mean those little radiators in each room in a house that allows to heat up the space of the room.
Right.
1-to-1. Why would electric baseboard be less desirable than in-floor heating per se? Or are they both the same?
Well, again, it comes down to the cost.
Yeah.
So in Nova Scotia, the most expensive way to heat your home is through electricity.
Okay.
Because our electrical rates are much higher than our natural gas and our oil rates.
Yes.
So again, it's not a matter of efficiency.
Yeah.
It's a matter of
Cost of product.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting because that does make sense because like typically when you see a electric heated home, the NS power bill is usually, a lot less desirable when you get a look at it on paper.
Right.
And that makes more sense because when you're using electric baseboard, the utility you're actually harnessing is electricity, which at a much higher rate of return than simply oil or even, propane, natural gas. Now we talked a lot about different ways to heat homes. Have we missed any, or is there anything I'm not thinking of it in terms of ways to actually heat a home? Oh, wood stoves.
Wood stoves. Well, there's definitely other ways. A wood stove is, I guess, a way to heat a home, but it's not a sustainable way to heat a home unless you're home all day and you keep stogging the fire.
Yeah.
Again, a few years ago, when the price of oil was going really high, people were flip-flopping between should I get a heat pump or should I get a pellet stove?
Yes.
Pellet stoves were the in thing for a while.
They still are. People still love them.
Well, they're the problem with a pellet stove that we find is that they're a lot of maintenance, right? They're a lot of maintenance. When pellet stoves were really starting to ramp up and be popular, probably like 10, 12 years ago, a price of a bag of pellets was probably $3 or $4.
Okay.
Now it's like $8.
Okay.
So, supply and demand.
Always supply and demand.
Always the way, right? So as the demand for a product goes up and, the supply starts to diminish, the price of the product goes up and the price of the pellets went up. Same thing with wood. The price of wood has gone up, right? Another way that a lot of people are starting to turn or at least look at is solar.
Ah, yes.
Right. So we as a company don't do solar. I find solar is it's kind of touch and go.
Okay.
I have my own personal opinion on solar from one end to the other, as far as whether it's photovoltaic for, which is the panels that you can have that will then give you charge up batteries and give you electricity, and then you consume the electricity. Then there's other solar options where it's hydronic. Essentially, what you do is you run an antifreeze solution through the panels, and they will absorb heat from the sun, and then you can utilize that to heat the space.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Talking about, I'm still on electric baseboard. I'm still on electric though.
Okay.
So when we're talking, because it is the most common thing you see when heating a home when you're showing Halifax homes. Electric, but how does it work as a basic fundamental system for those that don't know? When they walk into a home, they see, okay, this home is heated by electric baseboard. What should they be looking for in that system to make sure it's still in good working order?
There's not a lot. The nice thing about electric heat, and probably why it's relatively popular, is it's the cheapest option for installation.
Okay.
So it's, as we say, it's the rule of thumb is the cheaper the installation, the more cost it's going to be to operate your heating system, right? So I mean, if you take a home, you need a thermostat and you need a baseboard in a bedroom, right? So the thermostat costs about $25.
Yeah.
And the heater costs somewhere between $50 and $150, depending on the size of it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you put in a heat pump in that room, it could cost $2,000 to $3,000.
Yeah.
Right. But essentially the way it works is it's just wires. The wire goes to the thermostat. The thermostat calls for the heating when it needs to. It then allows the power to go from the thermostat to the heater. And it's just an electric element inside the baseboard.
Okay.
And it just consumes the electricity. The electricity heats up the element.
Okay.
And
you have heat.
You have heat.
You have heat that heats up your room. Okay. What about hot water baseboard?
Hot water baseboard, depending on what you're using to heat it with, you can either use natural gas, propane, electric. You could do an electric boiler, or you could do oil.
Yeah.
Most of the houses in Halifax, for the longest time, they were oil. A lot of people are converting over to natural gas. Essentially, what that is it's a boiler in your utility room. It circulates hot water. So what it does is it brings on the burner. The burner will burn oil that heats up a heat chamber inside the boiler. Yeah. That will then in turn heat up the water.
Yes.
And then same thing, once the thermostat needs the heat, it will allow, what it does is it opens what's called a zone valve.
Okay.
And then that allows hot water to flow from the boiler to whatever zone in the home is calling for the heating.
Okay.
And it just basically runs hot water through, it radiates out of the radiator, and that heats the space until it satisfies the thermostat, and then at which point it shuts it off again.
Okay. When you talk about zoning, it makes me think of in-floor heating, just because you really see, when you look at in-floor heating system, you can really see the zones on the actual system itself.
Right.
So when it comes to in-floor heating, how is it as a heat source to heating a home? Like, is it efficient? Or is it just something nice for your feet?
No, it's efficient. Again, I have my own personal opinion of in-floor heating.
Okay.
One of the challenges that I find with in-floor heating, especially again in our climate, is it's wonderful this time of year. You get up in the morning on a day like today, you've got a nice warm home, you've got a nice warm floor, it's very comfortable. The issue with it is when you get into the shoulder season, which in Halifax, even in January, I mean, just this past few weeks, we're in shoulder season temperatures. Yeah. So the issue with it is that you'll get up in the morning and you'll turn your heating on, because a lot of people like to turn the temperature back at night. Yeah. So you'll turn your heating on in the morning. You'll go from 19 degrees to say 22. What happens is that it takes a long time for that floor to heat up. Yeah. Once the floor heats up, it'll then heat the space. Okay. So what happens is that, especially in like the spring and May, or in September and October, you'll get up in the morning and on a September or October morning, it can be 7 degrees. It's chilly. You need heat. You turn the heat on. By noontime, that floor has been heated up. The space is heated up, but also the outside temperature has now gone up potentially to 23 degrees. Yep. So what happens is that you're overheating the house. Okay. So what I find with in-floor heating is it's a wonderful product during the cold times of the winter, but it's really hard to regulate during the shoulder season.
Okay.
As far as it being efficient, it's a little bit more efficient than a baseboard heating because you're heating the entire square footage of the home,
Yeah.
versus trying to radiate that heat to heat the space around a radiator that's located on the outside wall.
Okay. My next question is going to be, how important is insulation in a home for heating it?
Significantly.
Okay. What kind of impact can good insulation have on a home when you're trying to heat it?
Well, the way, when we look at, I mentioned this earlier, what we do is when we look at a home, normally when you design a heating system for a home, you would do a heat load calculation. And essentially what that tells us is, at what temperature, there's design criteria you follow. So let's say that if you look at a home, a typical design criteria for wintertime is minus 16 outside and plus 21 degrees inside.
Yeah.
So there's a temperature difference of 37 degrees between inside and outside temperature. As the temperature outside drops and that difference between inside temperature and outside temperature widens, your home essentially what it's doing is it's losing heat. Okay. Because there's, you can insulate the walls, but at the end of the day, the colder it gets outside and the greater the temperature differential, your home will eventually lose heat. So what we have to do as heating professionals is size the heating system to overcome that heat loss. Okay. So the more insulation you have, the longer the home will hold on to that heat. Okay. But we run into situations where customers will have, gone through a process where the home might be 40 or 50 years old, and they've gone through the Efficiency Nova Scotia process and they've insulated and they've done a bunch of upgrades to the home. One thing that I think people are missing is the construction of a home 40 or 50 years ago was significantly different than it is now. For instance, all the homes that are built nowadays have to be built with exterior walls that are made from 2x6. So there's 6 inches worth of insulation in the wall.
Okay.
Versus older homes, a lot of them were built with 2x4 walls. So you can fill that wall up as much as you can with insulation, but your insulation value is only going to get to a certain point because insulation is based on the thickness of the insulation itself.
Yeah.
So what a lot of people do is they upgrade the home, they insulate their 2x4 walls. If they don't put any form of foam or board on the outside in order to accommodate a thicker insulation value, they're still only getting maybe an R12 resistance rating on their insulation, whereas a new home is double that value at R24.
Okay.
So, when we get into doing sizing of heating systems, especially heat pumps, we've seen a lot of failure with other heating companies that have gone in and not taken that into consideration that, okay, well, yes, the windows have been upgraded. We've put a lot of insulation in the attic. There's insulation in the exterior walls. So they will then treat that home as a newly built home, not realizing that the walls are no thicker than they were before they did the upgrades. And therefore, yes, there's more insulation than what there was when there was seaweed in the walls.
Yeah.
But there's still not that high value as what it would be with a new home.
Okay. With our values, now I don't know much about our values, just putting it out there world. What is the R value and why is R12 better than R20? I mean, why is R24 better than R12? Why is that sufficient?
So essentially the R for insulation values, R is essentially resistance to heat loss or flow.
Thank you. Okay. I needed that.
So it's the best way to compare it or look at it would be like if you go outside right now with a t-shirt on.
Yeah.
You're going to lose heat really, really, really fast. Your body is going to lose heat really fast, and you can get hypothermia a lot quicker than if you put on a Canada Goose coat. Okay.
Low R value versus
low R value.
High value.
Okay. So your body is producing heat. The coat is essentially keeping that heat in.
Insulation.
Exactly. And therefore, it is a resistance to the heat loss to the air around you. Right?
Okay.
Eventually, if you sit outside long enough, no matter what you have on, if it's cold enough, you'll get cold.
Yeah.
But essentially, that's how it works. So the more insulation value you have in your home, the better off you're going to be because you're going to hold on to the heat you're producing longer.
Okay.
And that's going to reduce your heating costs.
Yes. So when you're looking, so if someone's going to Home Depot or a Kent for insulation purposes, they should be shopping for the highest R value, or is R value made up of the type of insulation as well as the structure of the home that we just talked about?
Well, the R value is based on the density of the insulation that you buy.
Okay.
Okay. But it's also based on the thickness. So today's building code standard, the exterior walls need to be R24.
Okay.
And the attic needs to be an R50 value.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. So what they do in the attic is they potentially could use spray foam.
Yeah.
Or they could use a cellulose product, which they build up a certain thickness of it. So the thicker it is, the higher the R value.
Yeah.
When you're a homeowner and you're doing it yourself or whatever, trying to add insulation value to your home, you can't take an R24. You can't make a 2x4 wall R24 unless you were to add insulation in the wall. And then what a lot of people will do is they'll take that rigid styrofoam.
Yeah.
And that will usually give you somewhere between an R, you can get R2, you can get R4, depending on the thickness of the foam and the density of the foam.
Yeah.
And that can add an R value to the home as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to specific insulation types, would it be better to use the spray foam, or would it be better to use a different, like the fiberglass kind? Like what one is better for a home, or just typically in general?
I don't know if either one is necessarily better. I think the spray foam has some advantages because the nice thing about the spray foam is that is your vapor barrier. So that becomes your vapor barrier and it's your insulation value. The other thing that's nice about the spray foam is that the thickness of it doesn't have to be nearly as thick as a fiberglass insulation. So in a 2x4 wall, you can get a higher R value with a spray foam than you can with a fiberglass bad insulation.
Yeah. Now, for those people sitting at home wondering what the hell a vapor barrier is, what is a vapor barrier?
Well, when you build a new home, and you put, your regular pink insulation that everybody's probably seen in the walls, you have to then put basically it's a plastic sheet of plastic that goes around all the exterior walls, your attic and everything else. What that does is it insulates you and your airflow from getting outside.
Yes.
It creates basically a bubble inside the home.
Yeah.
If you were to just put insulation in the walls and you had no vapor barrier, you're not going to be able to maintain the heat as long because you don't have that, again, we can compare it to like a coat.
Yes.
So if we take a winter coat and you have, the Teflon or whatever, those high-end coats have, that has, a higher resistance to heat loss than if you were to just take the Canada Goose coat and just use the goose down as a duvet without that Teflon or without that, nylon or whatever is in the coat, right?
Yeah, I'm with you. So the spray foam offers that as well as the higher value and the vapor barrier so your home can breathe.
Exactly.
Okay. So I guess you mentioned a few of my questions. You mentioned not my preference. So what is your personal preference to heating a home and why?
Well, my personal preference to heating a home, I think that a good higher end or higher efficiency heat pump would be the best way to go.
Okay.
The reason for that is because with a heat pump, for every dollar of electricity you're consuming or kilowatt hour you're consuming, depending on the model, depending on the brand and the efficiency rating, you can get upwards of, $4 to $5 worth of energy out of that. That's the argument of efficiency. Whereas if we take an electric heater, for every dollar that we put into it to turn it on and run it, we are getting $1 worth of energy out of it.
Yeah.
If you take a good high-end heat pump, you can get $3 to $4 worth of energy out of spending $1.
Okay, well, that's the greatest return on investment of all time.
Exactly.
Okay, so when it comes to heat pumps, because there's a lot of great things about them, what is the best home for a heat pump? Because my understanding of a heat pump is that when you have a heat pump on a wall, it's going to heat the room. Now, if you have an old boxy house, that's not going to be very efficient for the house. If you have a nice, gorgeous, open concept house, the heat pump works a lot more efficiently. So how can you if you have an older style home, how can a heat pump be the solution for you?
Well, a lot of people believe it or not, a lot of people spend a lot of time in specific rooms of their house. And even though we all have different size homes and rooms, a lot of us don't spend as much time in certain rooms as we do in others. So when we approach a home that's chopped up into a lot of small rooms, what we'll do is we'll try to locate the heat pumps in areas where the time is most spent. And what that can do is it will heat that space to a comfortable level. It will probably be the primary heating 90% of the year. And then for the rest of the home, what you can do is you can reduce your heating, you reduce your thermostats if it's electric heat or baseboard. If you're not using those rooms, you can return the heat down, 18 or 19 degrees. And therefore heating those rooms won't be as expensive while still getting the benefit of the heat pump in the areas of the room of the house that you use most often. It does become a challenge when you have an old cut up home. Especially if the home is under insulated, a heat pump may not be the solution for you. Unfortunately, heat pumps aren't the end all do all.
Yeah.
I think that the way they've been promoted and the way that they're pushed from industry, whether that's, from Efficiency Nova Scotia or Nova Scotia Power or wherever, they definitely have their place, and they are definitely a significant part in reducing heating costs. But if you have a home that's 80 years old and you've done no upgrades, you've got old wooden windows, there's hardly any insulation or what have you, a heat pump really isn't going to be a benefit to you, because unfortunately the heat pump won't be able to maintain the temperature for you the way that you want. And we've seen this where, elderly couples will buy a heat pump from someone, they'll have it installed. Next thing you know, they're looking at it and they're like, well, our power bill went sky high. We're still burning a significant amount of oil. This really didn't solve our problem. And the reason for that is that before we look at doing a heat pump in a home, we really need to look at the building envelope. And when we approach a home with customers, if they've done nothing to increase the insulation values, their windows are old, their home is really old and drafty, filling that home up with a bunch of heat pumps is really not going to give them what they're looking for, because we have to keep in mind that when we're selling these products, the goal here is to reduce heating costs.
Yes.
That's the primary goal for people. They're looking at efficiency. They're looking at, this old drafty home, it costs us an arm and a leg to try and heat. We want to try and reduce our heating costs. Well, if the temperature outside were to maintain 0 or above, that would be fantastic for a heat pump. But on a day like today, where it was -12 this morning, that heat pump probably isn't going to do anything for them, because the home, for the heat that the heat pump's providing to the space, the home is losing it twice as fast because there's not enough insulation. The windows are old and drafty, and so what ends up happening is the heat pump's running as hard as it can to try and keep up. It's still not doing the job. So then they've got this high power bill, and their oil bill is still high because then they still have to burn a bunch of oil.
Yeah. Just now going on that, first off, the first analogy I would use, that t-shirt analogy, t-shirt versus Canada Goose. If you don't have proper insulation, you buy a new fancy heat pump, you're just adding a second t-shirt.
Right.
You got 2 t-shirts gone, no coat.
It's an expensive t-shirt.
Yeah. But next thing is, now in that example of no insulation in the house, buy a new heat pump, when it's working at full capacity as hard as it can because it can't get up to that proper temperature, that'll have a shorter lifespan, will it not? Just because it's pumping so hard.
Absolutely.
So what's the typical lifespan of a heat pump?
Well, for the normal ones that you see on the wall that everyone has, those seems to be the very common ones. Those are called ductless mini split heat pumps.
Yep.
Depending on the brand, again, I mean, for an average lifespan, you're probably looking at about 12 to 15 years.
Okay.
Right.
But if that thing's juicing out all the time, you're going to be down
less than 10.
Yeah. So like the 8, 7, 6. Yeah. And you just forked out 6 to 10 grand, as you say, for a heat pump. That only, and like if you're looking for return on investments, break it down to 10 years. That's not your biggest return if you don't insulate the house properly. If you don't make sure the house is doing its job into keeping your heat in the home itself. Now, when we talk about that and understanding how the home works and breathes and operates, do you guys go in first and then recommend what solution to put in place afterwards?
Yes. So what we'll do is we would do a consultation.
Okay.
And so we would do an in-home consultation and, a visit with the customer, get up to speed on, what upgrades have been done to the home, how old the home is, all those sorts of things. So that way we can then gauge is a heat pump actually right for your home? If it's an older home, in the peninsula and they haven't done any upgrades and they're running electric heat, or they're running, say, an old oil boiler, a heat pump may not be the way to go. It may be more advantageous for them to look at a gas boiler, because heat pumps are designed to maintain temperature. That's why they're so effective of giving you low heating costs. They're not designed to raise and lower the temperature dramatically. They're more designed to kind of, set it and forget it and let it maintain temperature. We get a lot of calls from customers that think that they're doing themselves a justice by lowering their heating costs, where, let's say they have like a ducted heat pump, where it's got one thermostat in the home. They'll set the thermostat on the heat pump to 18 degrees when they go to bed. And then when they get up in the morning, they'll turn it up to 22. Well, what happens is with a ducted heat pump like that, anyone that has one, they know that there's a auxiliary style of heat that's in that system. A lot of times, especially with newer homes, it's an electric auxiliary. Well, what happens is that the thermostat will bring the heat pump on. It will run for a short period of time, and then the thermostat will instinctually bring on your electric heat to boost the host temperature up to be a comfortable level. Because for the heat pump, especially on a day like today, if it was minus 12, the thermostat would know that it's going to take a very, very, very long time for the heat pump to raise the host up that 4 degrees.
Okay.
So it's essentially more efficient or more effective for the thermostat to bring on some auxiliary heat.
Electric baseboard.
Or electric heat that's built into the furnace to augment, to bring the host back up to temperature. If you do that every single day for a 30 or 60 day period, you're going to get a pretty juicy power bill.
Which is when you see typically the power bill gets really juicy in the wintertime, because people don't realize that the new heat pump that they put in isn't doing the job.
Exactly.
And then you get
or they're operating it inappropriately.
Yeah.
And so with heat pumps, it's what we see a lot of customers is it's a lack of understanding of how the product should work.
Yep.
And it's really educating them on how to operate it properly. We do actually see a lot of improperly installed systems. That's been a huge issue.
Okay.
Unfortunately, heat pumps in Nova Scotia, Atlantic Canada, right across the board, is probably the most popular place in Canada for heat pumps. When you go to Alberta, they don't even know what a heat pump is.
Interesting.
Because the temperature gets so cold in Alberta that a heat pump really isn't effective for them.
Yeah.
So what you see a lot in Alberta are gas furnaces, and if people want air conditioning, they'll put an air conditioning system in. Same thing in Ontario, it's kind of touch and go. But yeah, like Quebec and the Maritimes is really the hotspot for heat pumps.
Not even BC?
Some,
okay.
but even in BC, from my colleagues that we talk to with dealer meetings and things like that of the products we sell, heat pumps are relatively popular there, but again, a lot of it's natural gas.
Okay.
In the last 10 or 15 years, I've been doing this stuff for 25 years as a whole. We've seen a lot of overnight heating specialists.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of people saw the money and the dollar signs when it came to, selling and installing heat pumps. A lot of them that got into this industry really had no formal training.
Yeah.
Some of them come from business backgrounds, you name it. And so they start a business overnight. They have a great business and marketing skill. They're drawing in a significant number of customers. But unfortunately, they're going about it in an inappropriate manner, which then ends up ruining it for the rest of us, because either the heat pumps in general get a bad name, or the customers end up
dissatisfied.
Yeah, extremely.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So before we get out of here, I got one last question. When that initial consultation, someone gives you a call and you're going in, explain exactly what you're looking for and how you build a consultation to give them the best bang for their buck on providing the efficiency that they need in their home.
Well, normally what we look at is we'll look at their current heating costs.
Okay.
Because, again, promising people something that is unrealistic is not our approach.
Yeah.
I think that like I had mentioned earlier, with the marketing and the push for heat pumps from Nova Scotia Power and Efficiency Nova Scotia, there's this idea that the heat pump is going to be this glorious, wonderful, basically send you money and at the end of the month on your power bill kind of option. So we look at their current heating system to kind of give them a gauge as to, what are the options and what can you see on a return on investment, because they're not for everyone.
Yep.
Then we'll look at the age of the home, the size of the home, the current heating system, how efficient or effective it is. Are there any installation issues with the heating system that's currently installed? Because again, it's not just heat pumps. It's, lack of understanding. There's always a chuck in a truck that somebody's going to hire, for that cheapest price, or, Yeah. So we see that, or the harder ones are the do-it-yourselfers.
Oh, yes.
So we see those all the time. We go in and we'll look, and this person will have done this, or that person will have done that. We've seen anything you can imagine. We've seen plastic dryer vent piping that people ran all through their basement to try and heat their house instead of properly metal ductwork.
Yeah.
All kinds of sorts of things like that. So, but yeah, basically we do a full assessment of the home, insulation upgrades, window upgrades, age of the home, current heating system, open area, all those sorts of things, right? And then we can kind of sit back, gauge it, speak with them about, what's the long-term goal here. A lot of people, if they're only going to live in the home for a 5-year or less period and they're going to sell the home, then, it's probably not worthwhile to put a huge amount of money into, this fang-dangled heat pump system, so we look at kind of a broad range of everything, right?
Yeah. Okay. And how much does that service cost?
That's free.
You do that free?
Yeah. So we do an in-home consultation where we can talk to customers, go over their needs with them, give them a formal estimate, and present them with a package as to, what they can expect, and, give them an idea as to the return on investment. We have an operating cost calculator, so we can look at your current heating system and then compare that to, 2 or 3 different options that we may propose. So you can get a sense, okay, well, this is my upfront cost for this product, but this is the return on investment. This is kind of what I could expect to see as a cost savings. So yeah, no, that's a free service.
Wow.
Yeah,
you're too generous.
Yeah,
Cory, man, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
No, I appreciate you having me in.
I'll have you again. Thank you again.
Thanks.
Bye. If you'd like to get in touch with Cory, you can reach him at 902-497-8865 or Cory@atmospherecomfort.com. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can reach me at 902-220-7357 or jason.paul@kw.com. Thanks again. Bye.